The project began quite accidentally. My wife and I were traveling in Austria. She had heard of Mauthausen. She said, why don't we see what's there? We had no idea what was there. And we found this amazing, as I mentioned, granite, hand-hewn stone, castle-like structure that had been very well preserved by the Austrian government. And it was breathtaking, just breathtaking. And I took some pictures. More or less at this same time, I had developed a method of photographic printing that I called Gumoil. And somehow this picture, as I was taking it, or soon after I took it, and my process seemed to, in my mind, seemed like would work rather well together. And it did. But I didn't think a great deal of it. It was a rather shocking trip. It was rather shocking to make the pictures when I got back home. But it began to percolate in my mind that I wondered what these other camps looked like, and I wondered if I could find some others that had architectural images I could photograph. And I became more and more interested in doing this, and I ended up making 4 trips altogether over a period of several years to these camps. Sometimes my wife was with me, sometimes a friend was with me. On this last occasion, we had quite a few family members with us also. My wife's cousin, Naomi Warren, who's a Houstonian and who's been involved in this project as an interested observer, survived Auschwitz, and the fact that she had motivated me to make this series also. And then when I presented it to the museum here, they were interested in showing the pictures. Auschwitz I, which is in Poland, Oświęcim, Poland. It's not far from Krakow. This front gate is in metal, iron, and it says Arbeit macht frei, which means work will make you free. They all had this sign somewhere in them, and of course work didn't make the people free. It usually preceded death from overwork, starvation, or outright slaughter. In any case, this is the opening to the camp, and Auschwitz I, and Auschwitz I is characterized by lots of brick buildings. These buildings were built originally by the Poles, by the Polish army, somewhere in the mid-19th century, and then where the military installation was actually captured and appropriated by the Nazis. And so the Gestapo, as you know, is largely in charge of these camps, and each camp has a distinctive history. Some were only for execution, some were for execution and labor, and some were primarily for labor alone, slave labor, of course. I picked this one to show you because it shows the original concrete stanchions with the electrical wire that invariably circled these camps. And in fact, there was a double layer of concrete stanchions and a double layer of electrified fence. This sign in German says, "Be careful, high tension electricity." Interestingly, this sign is on the outside of the camp, so this was to protect people who might civilians and military people who might accidentally approach these highly lethal wires. There were no such signs on the other side where the prisoners were kept, and in fact, the prisoners often were electrocuted on these wires, and often they electrocuted themselves intentionally because the conditions of the camp were so grotesque. This one is also from Auschwitz I. It looks rather beguilingly like a swimming pool, and in fact was built by the Gestapo, or the SS, specifically to look like a swimming pool. Diving platforms at either end, ladders to climb in and out with, but in fact it was inside the prison yards, and it was definitely not a swimming pool for the amusement and well-being of the prisoners. It was a water-holding facility for the fire brigade. So in case a fire broke out, they could save the buildings, and that's its only purpose, so far as I know. It has since been filled in with concrete, so this water that you see in here is actually only about 3 inches deep. This particular picture is from the outside, looking in, of the camp called Auschwitz II or Birkenau. It's known by either name. It's about 3 kilometers from Auschwitz I. In other words, it's really walking distance. This is the main killing camp that people associate with Auschwitz, although it also had a large forced labor section within it. The section called Canada was inside this, and this is where women prisoners were kept and assigned mostly to the job of sorting the luggage and valuables of the prisoners who were brought in by train to this camp. The vast majority of whom were gassed and burned at this very camp. And I chose this picture to show you because here is a bicycle rider, probably a farmer, local farmer, and he's just traveling down this wet road. This is late winter, and I think it illustrates what the Polish people have tried to do, which is on the one hand, they've tried to preserve 2 of these camps in Poland, 3 of these camps in Poland, Auschwitz I, Auschwitz II, and a place called Majdanek, which is about 100 miles from this camp near the town of Lublin. But it does show that normal life has continued in the outskirts of these camps, and this fellow is busily cycling along, and he appears to be carefully looking away from the camps. The camps are probably a fairly gruesome and grim reminder for the locals of what used to happen there, not all that many years ago. These are guard towers, this wooden structure here, and in fact in the next picture I'll show you, you get a better sense of what the guard towers look like. These were, I don't know what the distance was, but they were placed at regular distances all around the camp, and as I say, Birkenau was a huge camp, so there were many, many of these guard towers. And at the time that the camp was being used, they would always have soldiers in them, and the soldiers would always be armed with machine guns, so they could kill anybody trying to make an escape, and often did. I mentioned earlier the electrical fences. Well, all of these fences are electrified, and the prisoners often in desperation would try to reach the electrical wire so that they could put themselves out of their misery. And the guards in these guard towers would often be able to shoot them down before they got to the electrical fences. In other words, they were trying to prevent the prisoners even from the dignity of a self-imposed death. So they would be shot and left to die there bleeding on the ground. These ditches run along the entire perimeter of the camp. This ground is very low and swampy, and so these ditches served as drainage systems for the entire camp. They also, in many instances, I don't know about this particular one, they also were areas where the bodies were thrown. If they got behind in their burning, their incineration, they would sometimes be put into these ditches and left. And during the liberation, some of you will remember some of the photographs of the liberation. In some of the camps up in, I believe the one in Buchenwald and Dachau, these ditches were filled with bodies when the Allied soldiers arrived there. This is taken at the prison camp called Buchenwald, and Buchenwald was just outside a much larger town, a town known for its for the founding of the German Republic and the first democratic government that Germany had before the Second World War, between the first and second. And there was some irony then in building this camp, this one of these very early camps Hitler built just outside. And one of the things that they provided for the soldiers, the SS and the SS families who lived here, was a zoo. And this particular part of the zoo was called the Bear Grotto. And all we see now, there's no wires. These were probably electrified also originally to keep the bears from jumping out. But all that's left are the metal hooks that held up the wires. So they had a zoo, as it were, for amusement on this side, and then on this side of the fences, and here's one of those guard towers, were the prisoners themselves. So it was a captive zoo for animals and a captive zoo for human beings. The first camp that I visited was called Mauthausen in Austria, very close to the Danube River in near a beautiful little town up in the hills just above the town. I'm told that the smoke from burning bodies at this camp called Mauthausen often fell on the town below. It could not have been any kind of a secret to the townspeople what was happening up there. Number one, many of them no doubt worked up in this camp. Many of the prisoners were brought through town, all through towns, to go to other work sites. And then, of course, the trains that brought the prisoners here from Vienna and then further east in Yugoslavia and Hungary all came through that small town and were walked up the hills. So there was no doubt at all by the Austrian villagers of what was happening here. This particular picture I find interesting because there is no building left behind it. This is granite, this stone here, hand-hewn granite stone by prisoners, and there used to be a large hand-hewn granite stone building up here that was the Gestapo or SS headquarters. Apparently, right after the war, right after liberation, the prisoners blew this building up, destroyed it. So now all there is left are the stairs that lead to nowhere. But over on the left-hand side, you can see one of the big guard towers and two of the towers, and this wall, which is also made out of granite. There was a nearby quarry about 300 yards down a very steep hill that the prisoners used to chop out granite, shape it, and carry it on their backs up this very steep hill. And they literally built this camp in 1935, stone by stone. The camp itself looks like something that comes from the Middle Ages, and it is very durable, certainly. But in fact, it's a very modern structure. This is the interior of Mauthausen. Here you see these are the granite walls. It looks something like a castle. Castle or an American penitentiary, actually, like one from the 30s. And then these structures, the interior structures, were all wood, and this is where prisoners were housed, and where there was torture and execution as well. But there were kitchens, there were washing rooms, and lots of people went out from these camps to work locally in war munitions plants and rubber plants and so forth to help the Germans in the war effort. One of the interesting things about Mauthausen is that it had a very large number throughout its history of English, Russian, and American prisoners. These were military prisoners who were kept here. So if you were able to make a visit to this camp, you'll see many, many plaques that commemorate military men who were killed there. We're jumping all over Europe. That last one was Austria. We had just been in Germany at Buchenwald. I don't have any pictures in this particular grouping from Dachau or Sachsenhausen, but this picture is very striking. It's from Theresienstadt, which is a famous Czechoslovakian prison camp, and had a very long and interesting history. This particular picture is of a dissection table, and this building in which it's housed is next to some ovens and gas chambers which were used to execute people at Theresienstadt. Theresienstadt, however, was not particularly known as a death camp. It was as I say, it was in Czechoslovakia. It was the camp that became famous in literature because it was the camp that Hitler decided he would make into a model prison camp for the benefit of the International Red Cross. And the Red Cross came out and visited this camp and found all the children plump and happy and singing and doing art and theater and so forth. And all of that had been a kind of Potemkin village effort by the Gestapo, a one-day performance by all of these prisoners. They were fed for a couple of months very well just before this visit, and they all had parts to play. In War and Remembrance, Herman Wouk's book, this is described at great length. They played their part. The Red Cross left, gave it a clean bill of health, apparently, and then it went back to being a prison camp. And very large numbers of children, especially, were kept at Theresienstadt and were subsequently transported to Auschwitz and other death camps. But while they were here, there was not a great deal of killing that went on, although there certainly was starvation and death from disease. In any case, medical experiments took place in this building also. And this dissection table, just to show you what's going on here, this is a block where the corpse's neck would be supported, head would be supported. The head would lie this way and the feet would go back that way to the other end of the table. And then the drainage of body fluids would take place, and it would go down this pipe here, and then there was a drain in the floor, and as you can see, these are tiled floors. For some reason that I've never heard an explanation of, these legs, if you look closely, have serpent designs on them. This is the head of the serpent. You can see the eye of the serpent. And then this is the tail of the serpent as it wraps around this leg. And these are made out of cast iron. It just adds a sinister note. And as I say, I'm not sure when the table was built. I'm not sure what other functions it had, if it had any pre-war. But it was certainly used for some of those grim experiments that used to take place in the camps. This last picture is taken in Belgium. And interestingly enough, Belgium had a very large camp. It was called Braindonk, and it was a former military installation, I believe, from perhaps a fortress from the, I think perhaps from the 17th century. And this dungeon and fortress sort of structure had been converted into a prison camp by the Nazis. It shows that there was a moat around the camp. This is a guard tower. Here's the typical guard tower we see at all of these camps. And what this is a railroad trestle. The railroad trestle across the moat to the main camp. This is where carloads of people were taken in from the Belgian countryside for incarceration. And it's also the trestle that they were moved out and eastward across Europe, because many of the people who were originally imprisoned here were then sent to death camps in Poland. And large numbers from Holland and from Belgium left in this way on cattle cars, locked up brutal cattle cars, to Eastern Europe, and that's where they were actually executed.